3 years had passed. Adrian Blackwell was no longer known for his inheritance. He had become the face of corporate empathy, an unusual term in a world driven by numbers, not names. Under his leadership, Blackwell Industries transformed into a model of ethical business practices. Staff turnover dropped by 60%, and employee satisfaction skyrocketed. But for Adrian, the greatest success wasn't found in quarterly reports. It was found in Sunday morning coffee with Elena in a tiny Brooklyn cafe, where nobody called him Mr. Blackwell. Where nobody cared about his last name. Where she laughed like she used to, before the secret. Adrian and Elena didn't rush into marriage. In fact, they didn't rush into anything. They shared an apartment, modest, by billionaire standards, near a subway station. Adrian insisted on paying rent like any ordinary couple. Elena still worked in corporate development, climbing ranks on her own merit. Their lives were deliberate. Balanced. He still drove a regular car. Still answered his own phone. Still made mistakes and apologized for them. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. And that's what they both wanted. Trouble came quietly, as it often does. A whistleblower in the Seattle office uncovered a new scandal. One of Adrian's most trusted regional directors had been laundering funds and blaming it on mid-level staff. The press caught wind. The headlines screamed betrayal. Golden Boy Billionaire's empire under fire. Victor Blackwell, now retired, reached out. You need to strike back. Adrian shook his head. I need to listen. He flew to Seattle unannounced, met with every employee involved, read every complaint, and fired the executive in front of the entire office staff. It was messy. But honest. Elena stood by him through it all, not as a supportive partner, but as a fierce advisor. She told him the truth even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. One night, after a long day of damage control, Adrian came home soaked in rain, holding a brown paper bag. Dinner, he said, handing her takeout. She kissed his cheek and noticed something else. A small velvet box in his other hand. He opened it slowly, nervously. No spotlight. No music. No flash mob. Just him, in the kitchen, trembling. Elena, you've always seen me. Even when I didn't know who I was. I don't want to hide again. Not from the world. Not from you. He paused. Will you marry me? She didn't cry. Didn't gasp. She just whispered, yes. They got married 6 months later. No press. No mansion. No designer labels. Just 50 people in a sunlit garden. Co-workers, friends, a few family members, and Dennis, the night guard, who gave the funniest toast of the day. You know, Dennis said, raising a glass, this guy once ate cold pizza with me on a midnight shift like he was broke. Turns out, he was rich in all the wrong ways. But now, he's finally got the good kind of wealth. Laughter echoed. Tears followed. It was perfect. And private. Exactly what they wanted. Elena didn't want to be Mrs. Blackwell in the spotlight. She wanted to build something herself. So, with Adrian's encouragement, she launched her own nonprofit, RiseWorks, a foundation supporting women in corporate careers who came from underprivileged backgrounds. Adrian didn't fund it. Not fully. She raised most of the money herself, through partnerships, awareness campaigns, and even crowdfunding. Within a year, RiseWorks had helped over 500 women gain scholarships, job placements, and legal aid for workplace harassment. Adrian watched her shine, not as the woman behind him, but as the woman beside him. They didn't plan for children. At least not then. But life, as always, had its own schedule. One morning, Adrian found a tiny pair of baby shoes on the kitchen table. He blinked. Looked at her. She nodded, smiling nervously. You serious? He whispered. I am. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So he did both. As their daughter, Lila, grew, Adrian changed even more. He stopped chasing press interviews. Spent more time teaching Lila how to ride a bike than reviewing earnings calls. He handed over CEO duties to a trusted board member and became chairman. His goal wasn't power anymore. It was continuity. He created programs for young leaders from diverse backgrounds. Funded education reforms. Co-wrote a book with Elena titled, More Than a Name. He became a teacher, a father, a husband. A man no longer pretending to be someone else. Because he had finally become someone worth being. One morning, Adrian received an unexpected letter. Not an email. Not a call. A letter, written on the same paper used by Blackwell Tower's corporate memos a decade ago. It was from Ramon Ellis, the branch manager who had once humiliated Elena, buried fraud reports, and eventually been fired during Adrian's investigation. Now, years later, Ramon was dying. The letter wasn't an apology. It was a confession. I spent years hiding behind rules I twisted to protect myself. But I saw something in you, Adrian. You reminded me who I could have been, had I made different choices. Attached was a document, a file detailing yet another fraud ring that had survived even Adrian's reforms. Younger, smarter, more digital. He sighed, ran a hand through his graying hair, and whispered to himself. The work is never done. Adrian didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he called Elena. Over dinner, they reviewed the entire document together, names, reports, patterns. Elena, now co-head of RiseWorks and a part-time ethics consultant, leaned back in her chair. You built the system, she said. But systems evolve. You need fresh eyes again. You mean, Adrian began. Yes, she nodded. It's time you go back. To being a guard. No, she smiled. To being invisible. That's where the truth hides. 2 months later, a young man named Miles Aurora joined the Manhattan branch as part of the Adrian Blake Fellowship. Brown skin. Quiet voice. Second-hand clothes. Brilliant mind. Nobody knew his father was Adrian Blackwell. Not even the department head. Adrian and Elena had decided to give Lila the tools, but not the shortcut. If she wanted to learn how power worked, she had to start where her father once did. In the shadows. Elena was invited to speak at a global ethics summit in Geneva. In a hall filled with CEOs, world leaders, and skeptics, she told the story, not of a billionaire, but of a janitor's daughter who once tried to file a fraud report and got ignored. We forget that power isn't just what we wield, it's what we ignore. I've watched the most powerful man I know work night shifts to earn trust. And I've seen what love can rebuild when the truth is finally safe to be told. She received a standing ovation. Not because of who her husband was, but because of who she had become. Victor Blackwell died peacefully in his sleep. Adrian found the man's will tucked inside a safe behind a wall painting. It was short. Barely 3 paragraphs. But one sentence stood out. You became what I could not. I built a tower. You built a bridge. At the funeral, Adrian didn't cry. But he stood silently at his father's grave and whispered, "Thank you, for not stopping me." Lila held his hand. Years later, Adrian sat on the same bench outside the Queen's branch where he once asked Elena to forgive him. He was older now. Silver-haired. Slower. But the building still buzzed. Guards laughed in the lobby. A young girl with an intern badge rushed past, nearly tripping over her heels. Elena joined him moments later, coffee in hand. She reminds me of someone, she said. You? He smiled. No, she chuckled. You. Always in a hurry to prove something. I guess I still am. She looked at him. You already did. On their 20th anniversary, Adrian published one final blog post, this time under his real name. Wealth gave me everything. But it was lack that gave me purpose. I learned how people love when they think you have nothing to offer. And how love built in silence becomes a fortress in storms. If you're reading this, don't wait until you lose everything to learn who you are. Find someone who sees the version of you that has nothing. And build everything together. Lila Aurora Blackwell became a board advisor at age 27, not because of her name, but because of what she uncovered. She exposed a shell company linked to international wage theft, and instead of running to the press, she ran to her mother. Elena smiled and said, "You're definitely your father's daughter." Adrian watched from the window of their small beach house, waves crashing behind him, Elena beside him, and their daughter walking the path he once walked. But smarter. Faster. Stronger. And he whispered, just once, to the wind. It was all worth it. 10 years after Adrian stepped down from active leadership, a major journalism outlet published a feature titled Blackwell Industries, a corporate case study in human leadership. The article was glowing, highlighting not just numbers, but stories. One such story was about a single mother who had been promoted from janitor to logistics officer. Another was about a security guard, one Dennis O'Malley, who became director of internal culture programs. Each story led back, in some quiet way, to Adrian. But more importantly, to Elena. A filmmaker approached Adrian for a documentary. He declined. But when they asked Elena, she paused. Then agreed, on one condition. Tell the whole story. Not the glamorized version. Tell how we hurt. How we lied. And how the truth saved us. The documentary was titled Guard Duty, the Love Story That Changed Corporate America. It aired quietly. But spread rapidly. People were moved not by the success, but by the struggle. Adrian appeared only once. Footage of him eating vending machine chips during his night shift. It was grainy, imperfect, and absolutely honest. Viewers wept. Not for the billionaire. But for the man who had once been so lost. He had to become invisible to find himself. Blackwell Industries held a tribute gala in Adrian's honor. He was 68 now. Still sharp. Still quiet. Still avoiding the spotlight. But that night, he stood up to give one final speech. He looked out over the crowd of executives, interns, activists, and janitors. And he said, "Don't build towers. Build hallways, wide ones. Ones where truth doesn't echo, it resonates. Where guards can become mentors. Where silence becomes dialogue. And where love can walk in without a badge." He received no standing ovation. Just silence. The good kind. The rare kind that means everyone is listening. Elena declined the offer to run for political office. Power doesn't have to be noisy, she told the press. It just has to be present. Instead, she expanded RiseWorks into a global foundation. She also created a new branch, Reclaim, a support system for corporate whistleblowers. "I want women to know," she said at a fundraiser, "that truth has a home. And it's not in fear." Behind her stood a giant mural, not of her, but of dozens of silhouettes. Faces you couldn't name, but whose impact changed everything. Adrian returned to the same Queen's bench again. This time, Lila sat next to him. "You really met Mom here?" she asked. He smiled. "Not met. Met again." "What was she like then?" "Sharp. Stubborn. Smarter than me. Still is." He laughed. Then paused. "Lila, whatever you become, remember this. There's always going to be someone richer, louder, more powerful. But there are very few people who are real. Be one of them." She nodded. Then stood, adjusted her blazer, and walked into the same branch where her parents once hid from the world. When Adrian passed away at age 83, peacefully beside Elena, he left behind no corporate will. No billion-dollar legacy fights. Just one letter. Addressed to Elena and Lila. It read, "You never needed to love the rich man. You loved the man who worked nights, ate stale pizza, and looked at you like you were daylight. That's who I tried to stay. Don't build monuments for me. Just keep building people." Lila Aurora Blackwell changed the name of Blackwell Industries to Aurora Works, in honor of her mother. She dismantled the old logo. Designed a new one with a single hallway carved through a circle, symbolizing transparency and movement. She didn't become a billionaire. She became something rarer. A leader who inspired trust. And when a journalist asked her years later how her story began, she smiled and said, "It didn't begin with money. It began with a lie that revealed the truth. And that truth lived on. In every hallway. Every whisper. Every coffee break between two strangers learning to trust again. And in the shadow of a company once built for power. Now built for people."